Okay, we're going back to these live pictures now. We are following this major breaking news out of the Middle East this morning where it appears that a ground invasion is underway. The official word at the moment, this is according to American networks and British networks as well, is that a limited ground invasion is imminent. However, looking at some of the pictures, we often see the bright flashes, and there are reports of heavy artillery fire that has been reported from Lebanese towns near the Israeli border. We're continuing to watch this, but former IDF spokesperson and senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracy, Jonathan Conricus, he's a regular on this program. He joins us now. Jonathan, can you just bring us up to speed with what's going on?
Yeah, good morning. What I think is going on is essentially Israeli preparations for ground operations. At this stage, I cannot confirm American reports that they have in fact started, so I'll be careful with what I say, but it's definitely close, and there's a lot of tactical activity. There's a lot of Israeli troops prepared along the border. There were reports, which I think are credible, of Israeli activity of special forces in the near vicinity of the border on the Lebanese side in order to prepare and collect intelligence. It's definitely quite a tense moment, and there's lots of hopes in Israel amongst Israeli civilians that this will be the turn of the tide, and this is what will allow Israelis to finally go back home after almost a year of being refugees in their own country.
Okay, so just looking at those flashes and those reports of artillery fire on the border, would that not suggest that it's already underway, Jonathan?
It could, but I think with these things, we have to be careful, and I especially remember instances where incorrect information was shared. So until it's clear and official, I wouldn't say that it has begun. There are various parties who have an interest in making it look as if escalation has begun, but I think the responsible thing to do would be to wait for official clarifications, either from the Lebanese or from Israel.
What does limited mean? What does a limited ground invasion mean, Jonathan?
Well, it's very closely related to the goal. And the goal, from an Israeli perspective, as far as I understand it, is to create the conditions on the ground that will facilitate a safe return home for Israeli civilians, about 70,000 of them, that have been evacuated from their homes and been out of their homes for about a year. That's the real issue here from an Israeli perspective, and that is what the pressure that has been applied on the Israeli military and government by the civilian thing.
So what does that all mean, conditions on the ground?
Yeah,
Can you just elaborate on that?
So what it means, tactically speaking, I think we're talking about a small, limited amount of kilometers of incursions into Lebanon in key locations where it is where it's important to hold terrain in order to protect Israeli communities. Perhaps it will go further in order to have bargaining cards for any diplomatic dealings afterwards. As I've said before, I think I've said it to you, this isn't about, taking the litany, and I don't think it's about having coffee in Beirut. It's just about allowing Israeli civilians to go home. And I think we shouldn't expect much more than that, which doesn't mean that there won't be fierce fighting. I think that Hezbollah has prepared a lot of infrastructure and devices on the ground, underground, and in various locations. So it will be tough. But at the end of the day, Israelis are anxious to go home, and I think that's what the IDF is now beginning to facilitate.
So how long could this take?
Well, it depends very much on the orders coming from Tehran and Hezbollah's ability to continue to fight. Hezbollah has sustained a lot of blows over the last 2 weeks in terms of their command and control and the rockets and missiles, etc. What they haven't sustained a lot of blows is the rank and file personnel and the amount of what you would call grunts or simple terrorists that are deployed in southern Lebanon. So there's still a lot of them, and I'm sure that they are still eager to fight. As such, we can expect quite significant fighting, and we can expect that Israel will move in a slow and deliberate way. A good thing here is that southern Lebanon is almost totally without civilians, and that makes it much more I wouldn't say convenient, but a better place to fight from an Israeli perspective, because then Israel can use fire and to advance according to military doctrine without endangering any non-combatants, and that's a great plus. Hezbollah will be stripped of using human shields, which is a tactic that they did in 2006 quite successfully. Now most of the South Lebanese are not there. That's a good thing for them, that they're not there in harm's way, and it's a good thing for Israel, because Israel will be able to fight faster and harder.
So just finally here, we'll have to wrap up, but could this end up being something a bit bigger than limited in terms of a strike on the airport? At what point would it lead to something more major than a limited ground incursion?
I think if Hezbollah decides to escalate, and I think we should say this clearly, Hezbollah up until today have fired at 20% range, 30% range, and then when they wanted to do more, Israel did quite successful interdiction. Now, if Hezbollah is capable of escalating, firing towards Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, perhaps some of our naval ports, etc., then of course Israel will retaliate in kind. And you mentioned one of the possible targets that can be struck, but by no means the only one. I think that what Israel will seek to do is to apply pressure on the ground to force Iran and Hezbollah to agree to a diplomatic deal that doesn't necessitate a big, bloody and long war, but allows Israeli civilians to go home, and Hezbollah disengaging from southern Lebanon and implementing Security Council Resolution 1701.